Jurgen Klopp is leaving Liverpool at the end of the season. So I asked you guys who should replace him, and about 90% of you said Xabi Alonso. But there were other suggestions, so I'm going to put 5 managers in charge for 5 seasons in Football Manager to find out who would be the most successful. We start the video at the end of the current season, where in this simulation, Klopp guides Liverpool to second in the Premier League, beats Aston Villa in the League Cup final, and wins the Europa League against Brighton in Dublin. He also made 4 big signings to the team that our new managers will have to utilise, as well as only really getting rid of Joel Matip. So every one of our managers takes over on June 14th, 2024. We'll start off with their former player Xabi Alonso, who's currently top of the Bundesliga with Bayer Leverkusen. Alonso only brings in 2 players, Javi Guerra for £62 million, potentially rising to 97, and a more reasonable 17.75 rising to 20 million for Karim Konate. He's got the side in a 4-2-3-1 with potentially Szoboszlai as a shadow striker, as he ends the season as Liverpool's top scorer. However, it's not enough to beat Man City to the title, as they finish 18 points off Pep's side. There's also a round of 16 exit in the Champions League to Man City in what ends up being a trophyless season, unless you consider the UEFA Super Cup as a trophy and not a glorified friendly. In his second season, he sells homegrown talent Curtis Jones for a cut price to Bayern Munich, but brings in wonderkid Adam Wharton, as well as 2 of the best centre-backs in the game. However, Diomande ended up playing more often than not as a defensive midfielder, with Pavlovic barely getting any game time. But maybe the issue is going forward, as Liverpool slipped to 3rd in the Premier League behind Arsenal and Man City. However, they beat them both en route to winning the Champions League against Real Madrid in the final. In Season 3, he raises a lot of money by selling ageing players such as Robertson and Van Dijk, but also lets go of promising youngsters Adam Wharton and Alan Velasco for way less than they signed them for. But it allowed them to spend 125 million to make improvements on the left-hand side of the pitch, as Cambiasso slots in at left wing-back, but despite spending £61 million on him, Gouveia only starts 1 game all season. This time, Liverpool miss out on the title by 5 points to Manchester City, and once again lose to them in the round of 16 in the Champions League. In his 4th season, he lets go of a very key player in Diogo Jota, and a rotation option in Joe Gomez for decent money. But the ins aren't very good, an 18-year-old regen from Aberdeen and 2 backup players at best. So the best 11 this season didn't change all that much, as once again Liverpool finish in 3rd place, and this season lose to Spurs in the Champions League round of 16. And in his final season, Alonso finally got the boot after a trophyless season, where Liverpool finished 6th in the Premier League. So just 1 major trophy for Xabi Alonso, and it was the Champions League to be fair, but there was no success elsewhere, which just isn't good enough for Liverpool. I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did. Klopp leaves Liverpool as one of the best teams in the world, meaning they pretty much have the pick of any manager they want, including Zinedine Zidane, who probably got the 2nd most amount of mentions from you guys. Now, interestingly, he made the exact same signings in his 1st season as Xabi Alonso, which made me think they must be pre-arranged transfers by Klopp. So I went back and checked, and they're not. So I feel like this tells us something interesting about the game. Obviously, the scouts have gone out, scouted these players and thought, yes, we're going to sign these players, regardless if Klopp's in charge or someone else is in charge. Zidane favours a 4-3-3, which is more similar to Klopp than Alonso, and utilises Wataru Endo and Harvey Elliott more than Alonso did. However, Zidane can only guide Liverpool to 3rd place in the Premier League, albeit in a much tighter battle. He also lost the League Cup final on penalties against Arsenal, but managed to guide the club to Champions League glory by beating Chelsea in the final. In Season 2, Zidane has a clear out of players, getting rid of Van Dijk and Joe Gomez way earlier than Alonso did. He then spent 150 million on 4 players that I think is better business than Alonso ever did, and you can see the immediate impact Nico and Roger Ibanez had as they slot straight into that first team. But Liverpool slipped to 4th in the league, which is worse than any season under Alonso. They also lose the FA Cup final to Man City, but do manage to win the League Cup against Arsenal. Then there's also a Champions League semi-final exit to Real Madrid. And that's more than Alonso achieved in 4 out of his 5 seasons. But over summer, he leaves Liverpool to take the France job instead. So a short but sweet spell for Zizou. I actually didn't realise this until I'd actually simulated 5 seasons into the future, where he was succeeded by Marco Rose, the current Leipzig manager, who won them a League Cup and Champions League in 2027. So he could well be a good appointment for Liverpool. But they may want to go for someone who's perceived to be more up and coming. So they may well go for Roberto de Zerbi, who will undoubtedly be on their radar given how much he's impressed at Brighton. Now he actually has a different transfer policy, still bringing in Karim Konate, but spends £93 million on Joao Felix in January when he sells Diogo Jota to rivals Newcastle. De Zerbi opts for a 4-2-3-1, opting with Endo and McAllister as his holding midfielders, and manages to lift the title at the first time of asking, better than both Alonso and Zidane. He also does the domestic double by beating Arsenal 3-0 in the FA Cup final, but Arsenal beat Liverpool in the Champions League round of 16. The only transfer in Season 2 is for Kenneth Taylor, who slots right in next to Alexis McAllister as a holding midfielder, and helps Liverpool drop to 4th in the table, which isn't ideal. But De Zerbi does win them the League Cup, and takes them all the way to the Champions League final, where they eventually lose to Real Madrid in extra time. So after 2 good seasons, 3 trophies and a Champions League final, it's only natural that Liverpool sack him. Wait, what? I have no idea what he's done to deserve being sacked, or how he's been sacked and Alonso wasn't. According to the news article though, it was unforgivable that they lost to Brentford in the FA Cup in March. After De Zerbi, they went for Diego Simeone, who didn't last a year, and then Didier Deschamps, who has just been sacked after guiding Liverpool to 7th place in the table. So I think that's karma for sacking De Zerbi. Julian Nagelsmann is a bit of a wildcard pick, as he's currently in charge of the German national team and he'll be concentrating on the Euros this summer, which may well rule him out of the job. In his first season, he sold Gakpo to help fund a few more ins. Like Alonso and Zidane, he still signed Guerra and Konate, but also spent big on centre mid Varela and wingback Kadioglu. He also opts for a 4-2-3-1 with Guerra and Varela in the middle, pushing McAllister further forward, which helps him win the title ahead of Chelsea by a single point. Chelsea in second feels like the most unrealistic part of this video. It was the only trophy this season though, as they lost to Inter Milan in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. In his second season, Van Dijk is the big exit to free up funds for 3 new players, including Tien Koopmeiners on a free transfer, which is a great bit of business. However, none of the signings make the best 11 of the season, as Joe Gomez takes over from Van Dijk, but maybe isn't that good defensively, as Liverpool fall to 2nd place in the table, 7 points behind Manchester City. There are no trophies this season as Liverpool lose in the Champions League semi-final, but that is fine for the board as they decide to keep Nagelsmann on rather than sacking him like they did De Zerbi for actually winning more than Nagelsmann did. In Season 3, Kostas Tsimikas is the only big out, as Julian spends £103 million on wonderkid Yusufa Moukoko to improve their strike force in January. However, he doesn't start ahead of Karim Konate. Instead, he makes just 1 start and 5 substitute appearances in the Premier League, as they finish 3rd by 3 points. I don't know, maybe if you'd played your £103 million striker more after you bought him in January, you might have been able to win the title. They did win the League Cup though, but once again lost in the semi-finals of the Champions League. But over summer, he decided to leave Liverpool and instead rejoin Bayern Munich. This then left the door open for Luis Enrique to come in and take the vacant job. Finally, we have our wildcard manager. More because I don't think he's a particularly good manager, but if he was, he would certainly be ahead of Xabi Alonso as the favourite to take the job. Of course, it's Saudi Arabia's 8th best manager, Steven Gerrard. He ends up signing Kefren Turam over Guerra, but makes it 5 out of 5 for signing Karim Konate. Turam plays alongside McAllister in a 4-3-3, and to Gerrard's credit, he takes them to 3rd place in the table. albeit 13 points away from Manchester City. I was expecting outside of the top 4. He also took them to the Champions League final, but it was Barcelona who proved too strong, as a 17-year-old Lamine Yamal scored a brace to win the trophy. He's going to be such a special talent. In Season 2, he makes some big money by selling Virgil van Dijk and Tyler Morton, which allows him to bring in Varela just like Nagelsmann did, but impressively, he also brings in Upamecano for what feels like a really cheap deal. But he doesn't start ahead of Joe Gomez, and for good reason. Gomez was good enough to help Liverpool win the title ahead of Man City by a single point. He then may have lost to Man City in the Champions League semi-finals, but he did beat Newcastle in the FA Cup final for a domestic double. But next season, Gerrard cashes in on Mohamed Salah and then replaces him with wonderkid Rooney Bargi and brings in Billy Gilmour for English talent, neither of whom make the season's best 11 or even the bench. But losing Salah was a big blow, as Liverpool dropped to 4th in the table. They also lost in the Champions League semi-final to Barcelona, the League Cup final to Man City, but won one trophy by beating Spurs in the FA Cup final. In Season 4, he recognises there is an area to strengthen, as he brings in 2 left-backs. He seems to prefer Dedic in that position over Kerkez and decides to use Ben Doak at right wing rather than Rooney Bargi. But it doesn't really work, as Liverpool drop to 6th in the table. They also lose in the Champions League semi-final to Real Madrid in what ends up being another trophyless season. But Gerrard is still in the job, which makes the De Zerbi sacking even more bizarre. In Season 5, he sells Alexis McAllister for big money, whilst bringing in 2 regens, a backup keeper and Rodrigo Gomez for the right wing, who then played backup to Ben Doak for the entire season. Imagine being a £78 million backup. If they'd used him more, he might have been able to help them lift the title, but instead they have to settle for a 2nd place finish in another trophyless season as Liverpool lose the Europa League final on penalties against Real Sociedad. So Gerrard was the only manager not to get sacked or leave the club across their 5 seasons. But I think that's because he's already an icon at the club in 2024. So I think the board will have a lot more patience with him than they would do with De Zerbi, who was sacked despite winning a lot more earlier on. Personally, I think De Zerbi was actually the most impressive of our 5 managers, but I would love to know what you guys think down in the comment section just below that subscribe button. Once you've done that, you can watch this video on screen, where I give 3 obscure football clubs the perfect facilities in Football Manager to see if it can take them from the very bottom to the very top of the footballing world.